called black metal music and encourages devil worship and the desecration of churches.
When I heard it, almost a cold shiver goes down your spine. What is all this about?
The ban, a form of music, they say, has disturbing satanic overtones.
Become almost absorbed in it.
Well, here we are again, finally. And what was supposed to be a 2-week hiatus grew to nearly a 2-month period of zero output. I humbly apologize for this delay, but it was not without good reason. All three of us had an extremely hectic time, and we were unable to get together and iron these things out. I myself lost 2 members of my family who were both very close to me and my wife in a matter of only weeks. Our producer and our editor had to deal with hospitalized children and invasive surgery, respectively. We kind of had no other choice but to slow down our recording schedule and try to get back to it once we had the opportunity to put out a show worth both our as well as your time. So today, without using our standard intro, we are back. And we are back with what is both a first for me as well as for our guest, an interview. Our guest was one-man black metal band Marrow from Amsterdam, who was gracious with his time and candid with his answers. We had a blast talking with him, and his personality is just as great as his musical output. And he too had to wait too long for this interview to release. Trigger warning though, we discussed the ongoing genocide in Palestine, so for anyone who is sensitive to that, or to anyone who cannot bear anyone claiming anything other than Israel good, everyone else bad, this might not be the episode or show for you. For everyone else though, welcome back. Okay, well, I'm here with Sahand. I think it would be nice for you to introduce yourself to the listeners and tell them a little bit about who you are and where you're from.
All right. So, well, first of all, thank you for having me.
It's a
It's
pleasure
very
to
cool.
have
It's
you.
my first interview as well, my first proper interview. So I'm Sant from Marrow of Man. It's basically my one man project started a few years ago. I'm 23 years old. I study at the UvA, which is the University of Amsterdam. Yeah, I guess that's a little bit about me. I'm very excited to have this talk, and yeah,
Right, wonderful.
get to it.
Well, I mean, the last 2 years have been quite exciting for you, I guess.
Yeah.
Released an album to critical acclaim, and recently you've also released a split with Decimation of the Spirit, it's called. I'm also wondering. Well, I think we can actually go into detail into that a little bit later in the
Yeah, sure.
conversation. I would actually like to take it back a little bit and check what your entry into the scene was. What was your gateway into black metal?
Ooh, yeah. All right. So I don't know, a little bit of a funny, I guess, history with black metal because I used to be like from the get-go when I started to get into metal. I had always been very much intrigued and interested by like the aesthetics and so on of black metal, but I was just really kind of held back by usually like the production quality of black metal. And I tried like multiple times over the years to really get into it and to listen to some classics, but I never really got into it until like I think 3 years ago or something when I tried again and something just clicked and the production and everything just started to make sense. And I now have the standpoint that the weird or like messed up or low quality or whatever production actually adds to like the soundscape. It makes for a very unique soundscape, and I've kind of very much moved away from like the overproduced, more modern stuff, I suppose. So I started listening some notable bands. I mean, Dissection, of course. I also listened to some Burzum was very much. I mean, Philosophem was just that was very hard for me to listen to, but it grew on me and actually very much added to the experience
Yeah,
because it's such a unique
one of the best
soundscape.
albums ever released.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
very interesting and very well put together. So yeah, that's kind of how I started. I also really got into like Odium, which is like symphonic black metal, also Emperor and bands like that. That those really intrigued me, especially because black metal can tend to be very simplistic and primitive, which is very nice as well. But it can also be more complicated and more, grand and triumphant and whatever. And that really caught my attention, and I started to go down this rabbit hole and also listening to some weird demos and stuff, and you really come across very much sick stuff when you kind of dive into the genre.
Yeah. It resembles my journey into black metal, with the caveat that I'm not a musician at all, but I did have this intrigue with the scene
Yeah.
for a long time already. But I was born in 75. So
Yeah.
the time when the second wave really took off was a time when I was like in my formative years.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was for me mostly a scary scene.
Yeah,
I,
for
I
sure.
remember very well the Kerrang issue with interviews with Hieronymus, and
Yeah.
them having a metal friend show me the picture of Dad lying on his bed with the gunshot wounds. And
Oh, geez.
um, yeah, I was 14, I think, at the time. So I was pretty much at that time, intrigued,
Yeah.
but not so much interested in the music, because I couldn't make heads or tails of it. Also because of
Yeah.
production values at the time. But over the years, especially the last few years, I've really delved into the scene and then started to have a grander understanding of what was happening. And actually, I think that the last couple of years, we see somewhat of a reinvention of the scene. But I think that's something I want to touch on later
Yeah,
when we
sure.
talk, because yeah, you grew up in the Netherlands,
Yeah.
basically being a part of the Dutch scene, and I'm curious also to find out what that was like for you.
Well,
Being a one-man black metal band at this time, but you're also part of an actual band,
Yeah.
like a full band in Almere, where you grew up, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So I really wasn't that much a part of a scene at all because I grew up like in my circles. I was kind of like the only metalhead. I was the only person that I really listened to it. I got it somewhat from my nephew, but like within my own friends, I was kind of the metal guy, I suppose. And then at some point, my girlfriend that I'm with currently still, she was also really into metal, and we started kind of explore that together. And really, I started because she knows a lot of music, right? So she introduced me to a lot as well. And then at some point, had been playing the guitar for a few years, and she sent me this message from like my current drummer, and they were like looking for a new guitarist, right? So she's like, yeah, maybe you should reach out to them and see. And I was kind of nervous, but I did it, and then I got into that band. This was like 3 years ago or something, I think. And from there, I started to get into the scene, started to go to some more concerts, gig a lot. We've had like 22 gigs now, and we really started playing live, I think, in June 2023. So yeah, that's when I really kind of started to get into the scene. So like in terms of my formative years and so on, being into the scene, I wasn't really a part of any. So I kind of joined in later. I've been mostly a just at home listener of metal instead of it's someone that really goes out of his ways to go into shows. And yeah, how I suppose the one man band started was that when I started to play the guitar, quite soon after I started to get into writing my own riffs and little passages and songs and so on. And I was just writing and writing and writing, and I didn't really know what direction I wanted to take my music. So I had like a stoner rock / doom phase, and I wrote a lot of that music, and that went on for a few years. And then eventually I started to get into black metal, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna try my hand at making like a black metal record. I'm going to release that, and then I'm going to see where I'm going to take it from there.
Right.
And that was pretty much the birth.
Yeah, and I mean, Cult of Carnage, the band that we were talking about, it's still
Yeah.
active. Also, I think released 2 singles in the past year. Is there any plans that will be followed up by a full-length release?
Yeah, we're busy with an EP currently, also responsible for mixing it, and it's in the mixing stages right now. So in between work and studies and so on. I try
Yeah.
to mix the record, and hopefully it'll be out in a few months.
Right.
We've been hard at work with it, so that's the plan right now. And yeah, with Marrow of Man, it used to be under a different moniker as well at first, but yeah, so pretty much that's the story of the project, and I decided to change the name
Yeah, I think
somehow.
there was another band with that name, right? What was the name
Yeah,
again?
exactly. Yeah, there were actually multiple bands, but there's one that's actually active right now as well. I think they're like a British like new wave heavy metal
Yeah.
type band.
What was the name?
A Forlorn Hope.
Forlorn Hope, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and
It's a good name.
yeah, that's why.
Yeah.
So like the reason I chose it, which is kind of funny, because a Foreign Hope is also like a thing in like military strategic stuff. So it's like this if I believe, if I'm correct, it's like this little group that's like put out, that's basically kind of meant to die. Like it's like that's why. But that isn't the reason I actually chose the name. I came across it when I was reading a book, and like it was a poetic way to put like a certain state of mind. And I was like, wow, that's a very cool word. And then afterwards, I found out that it has this different definition as well,
Yeah.
and that is what they are referring to,
Yeah.
right? So
And again, I do think, Sahand, if I look at, I think Marrow of Man is a name that is more fitting with the music. So in the end,
thank you.
I think it worked out.
Yeah, I think I made the right decision as well. It's also a completely unique name, which I also can appreciate.
Yeah.
I'm the only entry in Metal Archives that has that name, so that's
Yeah.
good as well. And I think the name fits with the lyrical themes and so on as well. So I'm glad I made that jump for sure.
Well, I mean, especially if you look at the Metal Archives, right? If you go in there and you try to find a band you've recently learned about, you often have to wade through like 5 or 6 bands with
Yeah,
the exact same name. We had a large discussion about Vehemence not that long ago, and I think there were like 3 or 4 bands with that name,
yeah,
including 2 bands that are actually doing quite well. Yeah, can be a struggle, especially with the huge amount of metal bands that are around and everybody
exactly.
trying to sound as mean and vicious as possible. So
Yeah,
the amount of names, the amount of words are finite, I guess. So
yeah, I guess so.
yeah.
Yeah, for
And so
sure.
so when did you start with the Marrow of Man project in and of itself?
Well, so I guess it's kind of difficult to really pinpoint because it's so tied to like me writing in general, because it's always been like this one man project. But I would say with like the months leading up to the release of Humanitas Vinkunter, which is my first EP, which was I think 2 years ago now. That's when I would say it really started. But I actually released like a single like a few years before that, like under the moniker of Foreign Hope, and that was really a like sludgy doomy type of song. And that was the point where I hadn't really figured out what I wanted to do with the project yet, like what direction did I want to go, and I just released a single randomly, no
Was that
promotion, no nothing.
Divine Right or is that
No, no, no. This is way back. The Divine Right is from my debut album. This song was called Wide Awake.
right? Yeah, it's on a debut. That's correct.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the song I'm referring to is called Wide Awake. I think it's still on Metal Archives. It might be
Hmm.
because somebody might have put it up there. And there are also some like very, very old songs like on a SoundCloud page that has
Yeah.
the name Full and Hope, and that's like really shitty. But it was a start, I suppose. But if I were to tie Marrow of Man and then Full and Hope to the black metal sound that I was going for, I would say like a half a year or something before the first EP release. That's when I would say it kind of formed.
Right. I did listen to the earlier EPs, and of course, I came across you first when I was listening to Ancient Hymns of Apocalypse.
Yeah,
And then I delved a little bit further back, of course, because I'm always interested to see
yeah,
what forms a sound, how it evolves. I think your sound is still evolving. And there's also something that I'm curious. I mean, you already touched upon some of the bands that inspired you with Dissection, Odium, but I'm also curious to see what sounds you look towards, what bands you look towards when developing your sound.
Well, do you mean like currently, like what I'm listening to, what I'm kind of inspired by?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, of course, the listeners don't know this, but I can see your background, and I see
Yeah,
Mayhem, I see Death,
yeah,
Sepultura, Burzum, so I see Darkthrone as well. So I
yeah,
mean, of course, the classic bands are of course of major importance to you and also to your
yeah,
sound. But I guess my question would be because of emphasis that you put on the quality of the recordings. I would say that you have an old school sound, but it's not as
yeah,
bad as those
yeah,
old school bands tended to be. And also, I hear dissimilarities between your guitar work and what they're doing. or what they
Yeah.
were doing at the time. It has a more of new wave of British heavy metal sound from time to time, and there's
Yeah,
some
with
some
Leeds and
thrash
stuff, right?
elements.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I guess my influences and what I listen to is somewhat diverse, and also because I'm in a death thrash band, that also somewhat carries over. And yeah, I do think personally that each of my releases has somewhat of a distinct sound compared to the other releases, and it's very dependent on what I'm into at the moment and kind of what I'm going for. And for my next record, I also tied into the production part. I have a very specific taste, I suppose, for my own music for what I want it to sound like. It has to be like somewhat distorted and somewhat raw, but it also has to be very large, right? So
Right.
I personally, when I listen to like somewhat more raw records, I prefer the types that aren't like very thin and like sound super far away, but the ones that are like all encompassing and huge, right? So that's what I
In your
try to strive for.
face.
Yeah, exactly. In your face, just the very large soundscape wise.
Is that also the
And
reason for the multiple layers in the vocals?
yeah, that's definitely also a part. I don't do that every time, but I do tend to like use it a lot in choruses or certain moments that I want to place some more emphasis on. And yeah, when a blast beat part kicks in and you have like three layers of vocals, it's supposed to be this wall of sound. So yeah,
Mm.
that is what I'm going for. And
They're like the Phil Spector of black metal.
yeah,
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 yeah, yeah. That was one of
exactly.
the things I written down when I was going over the records again last weekend. This wall of sound approach, which actually is like really nice when you juxtapose it with the softer elements that you have.
Yeah,
You get a little bit into the soft, loud element that was also such a huge influence on the indie rock scene of the 90s when we listened to the Pixies and things like that. So,
I never really listened to them,
no,
but
no,
I mean,
I think you would enjoy it.
oh,
Yeah,
fair enough. Okay,
yeah,
I'll
yeah,
give it a shot for sure.
yeah. It's not metal though. So,
That doesn't matter. I'm not that
yeah,
much of an elitist, so that'll be fine.
yeah. Hey, and I mean, well, we're both Dutch, so we're doing this interview in English for the listeners, but of course,
Yeah.
it's something that we share. What about the Dutch scene? Do you feel that you're actually a part of it, or are you somewhat outside of it and not having that much of a connection to the other bands that play from our country?
Well, like on a personal level, I don't really talk to other like major black metal acts. That's funny because sometimes I do tend to talk to people that reach out to me on socials or whatever. I really like sort of building a connection and a little bit of a community over there with people who like my stuff. And I have gotten like messages that I'm sort of becoming like a name within the scene, but it's well, first of all, it's very surreal to me because I'm just like to me, I'm just a guy making some music in his, in
Yeah,
his living room pretty much and releasing it. And also because on the other, I don't have that much context with like prominent figures within the scene. And also with my band, we're still very much large, small scale. So it's like very locally. And we don't really, I mean, we had a gig with Nephilim like
mm,
a couple of weeks ago, which is like pretty large mellow death band. They're sick. They released a new album recently, which is very good. So that was like kind of a big moment for us because we were playing with
yeah. For the band, right? Yeah. But
yeah,
when we look at Marrow of Man, of course, I
yeah,
mean, it there is this weird element of you just being this one man band, right? You don't perform live.
no,
I don't know if you have plans to do so.
no,
Uh,
not really.
no, we basically got a lot of these like small islands
Yeah,
around
exactly.
around the Netherlands where bands tend to make their music and go about their way. It's also not contained to like one specific location. I mean, where the Oslo scene in
Yeah,
the 90s basically hardly ever played live, but they were all like
yeah, they were
connected
tight knit
because they hung
together.
out together, right? It was a
Yeah,
time before internet, a time
exactly.
before being able to influence journalists or websites to play your music. So nowadays it's talked about the interconnectivity with the internet
Yeah,
being, especially social media. That's also how I reached out to you, even though we're like, what is it, 60, 70 kilometers apart. And bands like big bands from the Netherlands, like Fluisteraars, they're
yeah,
performing live once a year, maybe. And then you don't even know whether they're going to do this soundscape thing or they're going to play the actual music that they make. So it's a weird dichotomy, I guess. That's what I'm
yeah.
saying.
I agree. Yeah, it's cool to see, and I think for sure the entire digital part and social media and so on plays a very big role in how the scene has been shaped in the Netherlands. And concerning playing live, I don't really have any plans, But I didn't know that Fluisteraars like did like one show a year or something because
Yeah, this year they do one show and that's it.
yeah, because like in my head it's kind of all or nothing. Like either you have a full band and you play
Yeah.
gigs, or you are one man band and you don't do anything. But of course,
Well,
it's
that's
also
weird.
sort of like this middle
They've been
way.
around since 2009 and they
Yeah.
did their first live show last year.
Oh yeah. Okay. So I
So
don't know too much about Flashers. Have they always been a full band, or was it like did it start as
it's
a
two
one man band?
guys. It was two guys.
Um,
The one
okay.
doing basically officially, I think there's still two guys, but there's one that's doing all the instrumentation and one that's doing the vocals and lyrics.
Okay.
And live they're now playing with a full band.
Yeah. So that would be a potential option for in the future, but it'd be kind of a hard decision to in Marrow when the drums are sampled because I can't play drums. So that is a thing. So I would need to get a drummer and a bassist. And thing is I play the guitar and I also sing, but I don't think I'd be able, or at least I need some proper practice if I wanted to do both at the same time. And if I were not to do both at the same time, then I have to make the decision: am I gonna have a other vocalist, or am I gonna have another guitarist? And both would
Yeah.
feel kind of weird. But it's like for the future, definitely don't have any
Yeah.
plans.
No,
But
it's
you
what
know,
I consider when I look at a band like Black Braid, for instance, where John Krieger is basically leaving the playing of all the instruments to other people, and he's the front man. While
yeah.
back in the studio, he's the one doing everything. I think same with Noise from Kanonenfieber.
Oh yeah.
He's also chosen that route.
That would definitely be an option. I think that would be the most convenient and the easiest to get into instead of learning to play. Because in Code of Carnage, I do backup vocals, but that's like different than doing complete vocal parts that aren't
Yeah.
like exactly on time with like the rhythm of the guitar. It gets very confusing. So if I were to ever do live shows or something, I think it would probably be in a similar setup. Yeah.
Right. Because now, also, I mean, if we talk about well Dutch scene, but maybe we should look a little bit more broad than that. You're now at the point where you have over 3,000 monthly listeners on
Okay.
Spotify, which is of course amazing because there's like
Thanks.
3,000 people listening to what you created in your
Yeah.
bedroom, so to speak. At the same time, I mean, you've done this with hardly any like push from the press whatsoever. I mean,
Yeah.
even Dutch websites like Zware Metalen, for instance, have completely neglected to mention you in their review section.
Yeah.
Bands or websites like Angry Metal Guy is maybe still a little bit of well forlorn hope because they tend to focus a little bit on the bigger bands. But all
Yeah.
in all, I think those 3,500 listeners that you have right now, I think they came organically.
Yeah, which is very, very insane to me. And I think it also speaks on the part of how international my audience is because it isn't very much focused in the Netherlands. If you look at like the list of most listeners per country and per city and so on, the Netherlands actually is somewhat low on that list. And I don't know,
Same for
I
this
think
podcast, by the way.
yeah, it's kind of funny how that works, right? But I think that has to do with like the entire social media part and so on. And I might not have gone very much mainstream press, and it's slowly starting to become more and more of a thing because I'm also working with like pretty notable, I suppose, labels in the form of Fiat Productions, which has been absolutely great to me. She's offered me a lot of opportunities. A lot of people have been come into contact with my music through her label, and now I'm also working with Canti Eretici, which is also a great Italian label, actually. And they're also very much exposing me to a larger audience. So I think that one of the largest parts in, I guess, my reach, even though it is still somewhat underground, has been this also somewhat underground or independent labels that
Yeah.
were willing to take in my music, that were very supportive of me and have
Right.
given
Okay.
me
But
a lot.
I mean, it's also it helps that it's great music,
Yeah,
right?
thanks.
So someone like Metal Dad, for instance, pushing your music quite hard on social
Yeah,
media,
yeah,
and he has
yeah,
quite a number of followers, which
yeah,
also helped me get introduced to you, which is funny. The guy's in the U.S. I
yeah,
follow him on social media. I find out about this band I need to listen to, and only after having listened to it for quite a bit, I found
yeah,
out that we're practically neighbors.
yeah,
It's funny that way how it goes nowadays, but I think there is this issue now though with, and I've also experienced this with the podcast, so I might be talking a little bit about my own struggles there, is that I did write to the Dutch music scene, the Dutch music press, about
yeah.
what it is we're doing and whether they would like to give it some attention. Get no
Nothing.
replies whatsoever.
Yeah,
Not even a sorry, not now, or maybe come back in a while. just nothing. It does feel like there is this little bit of gatekeepy thing still going on, especially with Dutch people amongst each other.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, also when I started to kind of figure out, because when I did my first EP, this label reached out to me, the Oath slash White Wolf. They did the CD press of my first CD, and at some point I started. That was like confirmation for me, like okay, like maybe there's actually something behind this. And then from there on, I started to actually be the person that started to reach out to labels and to like writers and blogs and so on. And yeah, it's exactly what you say. Just get met with a lot of radio silence. Like I've written so many emails that I've never gotten any response, and it's from both Dutch and also international groups. And I
Mm.
feel like on the one hand, it might be a little bit gatekeepy, but also these people are at the same time probably busy and whatever, right? So it's like
Oh,
complicated,
absolutely.
you know?
We're probably among the many who write to them.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess it's up to us to maybe a little bit of a better job, and they will find us.
Yeah, maybe, and it's also just trying, right? That's how
Yeah,
I
yeah.
went about it. Just keep writing emails. Sometimes send 2 or 3 emails over the span of a few months. See if they respond. If they don't, they don't. You move on. You
Yeah,
know, it
that's
is
right.
what it is.
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah, no, yeah,
I think neither of us went into this with any idea of becoming like a big star anyway. I mean, this
no,
is
no, definitely not.
no, it's a time sink, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's a process of creation that's also fun. And talking
Exactly.
about that, seeing that Ancient Hymns of Apocalypse was for me one of the top records of last year.
Thank you.
It was among I think my top 10 albums
Wow.
of
Very nice.
2024. Very much enjoyed it. Curious what led to its creation. I mean, when I look at themes and reading lyrics, I pretty much figured out. I mean, we're talking about apocalyptic religiosity, biblical imagery, also a permeating sense of senselessness. Is it all interconnected? Did you write the record with the idea of going through what the tales of the apocalypse foretold?
No, not necessarily. So I would say, and this is gonna be somewhat in contrast with my next record, but Ancient Hymns of Apocalypse was kind of like molded and made and shaped along the way of writing. Because after my EP, the second EP, I didn't know I wanted to start writing a record, but I didn't really have that much direction. So I just started writing songs. And after a few songs, at some point I started to think about, okay, what do I want the overall lyrical theme to be about? What do I want the imagery to be about? What do I kind of want to do with the sound in general and so on? And then it slowly started to take place, and I had like conversations with friends, and also thinking about like what I want the album cover to look like, and this imagery of like this woman, this angel with the trumpets that sort of signals the start of the apocalypse popped into my head. And it was like, okay, and this, it needs to have this like big red moon behind it, and so on. And then it kind of went from there. And yeah, the lyrical themes are, I think, somewhat connected in a more like broad sense, but there isn't like an overarching story or something. So you have a few songs that are about like specifically biblical imagery and apocalypse and so on, but you have also other songs that focus more on, I don't know, more personal existential feelings of dread. And what I try to connect them all with is this underlying sense of like dread and of apocalypse, whether it be on a grand scale or on a more individual scale or an environmental scale or like a societal scale. So I try to have it like there's basically different branches of underlying theme that I went for in this album. And in terms of the instrumentals and writing and so on, I was just writing songs and riffs, and if the songs were good, I would just see where they kind of fit in the order, and like kind of made a list of how okay, these songs flow into each other nicely, and this is how I'm gonna put out the record. And I
Right.
still
Okay.
changed a few orders last minute and so on. But yeah, that's eventually how it came out like this.
Wonderful. I found when listening to it and reading the lyrics along that especially at the beginning of the album, I could see a through line, immeasurable emptiness, and at the end of
Yeah,
everything, those songs seem way more personal and talking about how you feel with regards to the finiteness of what we're all experiencing
yeah.
here on Earth. Yeah, yeah, that's nice answer. I enjoy that.
Thank you.
I think "On Mighty Plains of Ash" is my favorite song on the album.
So
So,
that's a funny story, actually. Upon My Plains of Ash is actually based on like a game on Dark Souls. I don't know if you know Dark Souls.
oh yeah, I finished it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, so in Dark Souls 3, at the end of the game, you know, you have DLC, And you have like in this landscape of the DLC also always just had a very large impact on me because it's like it's the end of time pretty much, and the only thing that's left are like ruins of old civilizations and plains of ash, right? So
Yeah.
that kind of inspired me to write that song, and it's about that last duel you have with Gale and so on. But it's also apocalyptic, so that's how it kind of tied into the
Yeah.
rest of the record.
I mean, it fits in really well. And I mean, I have seen that imagery in the game, and I'm also glad to meet a fellow nerd. So it's always good. I was also struck by when I went back and listened to the EP before this one, the
Yeah.
change in the vocal tone.
Yeah.
I think the EP before Ancient Hymns of Apocalypse, Humanitas Vincultur.
That's the first EP. So the
It's the
second is
first
a
EP. All right. So is it Debt Paid in Blood that
yeah,
I
that's the
listened to?
second
Yeah.
one.
With the more screamy vocals, whereas on Ancient Hymns you chose to go in a more growly direction. Is that something you found to be more interesting or in line with the themes, or is it something that started
Yeah.
organically?
Well, when I started writing, black metal and also in the second EP, it was very much one of the hardest things I had to figure out because I didn't really do vocals before I started doing the entire Marrow of Man thing. So I was still very much in the process of figuring out how I want to do vocals, what works for me, what sounds good, what feels comfortable, and so on. And in both of my EPs, I already had some parts that had some more like low growls and so on, but like the primary focus was the more high pitched vocals. And at some point after my second release, the second EP had been received somewhat well. I also kind of got the confidence to, because one of the primary reasons I chose for those vocals, even though the other type of vocals was more comfortable for me and I felt better with, because I had the feeling that, oh, it's black metal, it kind of needs to have this certain sound. But after that second EP, I started to experiment also with like the more growly vocals, but also kind of like doing the same technique, but pitching it up somewhat, so you don't have the like straight up death metal vocals where it's like completely growly and low, but also has a little bit of clarity and openness to it. And because my second EP had been received somewhat well, I got the confidence to just be like, okay, it doesn't matter what sort of the norm is or whatever. I'm gonna do what I feel comfortable with, and I think this sounds good and it's actually somewhat unique. So this is
Yeah.
just gonna be my main thing. And I have some moments where I do jump into the higher pitch vocals on both the split and the EP, but I went for mostly those types of vocals as
Yeah.
those just felt the best to me.
Well, you moved a little bit away from the Burzum sound.
Yeah.
It reminded me also quite a bit of Panzerfaust.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, they have that like a little bit. They also switch between high and low a lot, but they also have
Yeah.
this like mid range type of
Yeah.
thing. And
Yeah.
that's what I try to go for with those like
Yeah.
low growls that are like kind of done a little bit higher. Try to go for the
Yeah.
like mid rangey stuff. Yeah, I think that's sick. That's a great comparison. Thanks.
Yeah. Cool. Hi, Danny here. Just a quick thank you for listening to our podcast. We are happy to know that people are listening to the content we've created, and we truly hope that you are enjoying it. Making an hour-long weekly podcast is a pretty time-consuming side job, but it is one we love to do. However, that is something that I myself pretty much took for granted when listening to other podcasts. Hours upon hours of research go into writing one of these episodes, and our editor and producer then spend a lot of time checking my stories and then making them somewhat listenable for you. So what do we ask in return? Nothing. This show is free, and it will remain free forever. We believe in putting out a quality product that is enjoyable for almost everyone. However, we did set up a Patreon for the show, and if you can afford it, then we would welcome your patronage. But only if you can afford it. We have not planned anything specifically for patrons, and we are not eager to do so, as we do not believe in making our content exclusive to people who are able to pay for it. But we do welcome any donations you wish to make. So, you can head on over to patreon.com/Blackfall Podcast and leave us a small tip if you want to. We would also appreciate it if you could give us a 5-star review anywhere you can. And now, back to the podcast. So, of course, that the last release, it's not even been out for that long. Decimation of the Spirit
Yeah,
split that
just a
you did
month.
with,
It's been just a month. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
just a month. I think also there's a little bit of, well, there's a couple of things I want to discuss about the split, of
yeah,
course. There's a little bit of a change in sound where you went more into the raw black metal sound as
yeah.
opposed to the melodic black metal sound of the debut. Is that natural progression or was that choice you made for this specific EP?
So do you mean raw in terms of like songwriting or more so production?
Sound
Sound.
mostly,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I have like kind of a specific goal in mind when I try to produce stuff. And it is very much like that raw sound, but I still want it to be very large. And I tried to go for that in my Ancient Hymns of Apocalypse record already. I'm still like constantly learning and developing and learning new techniques and so on to get that sound going. And I think the soundscape of the most recent record is a somewhat natural progression of what I was trying to go for. Indeed, it's like debut record is somewhat more thrashy and like more tight and also in terms of production. So it's like a little bit more clear. And with this record, I tried to make it more like large and more raw. So yeah, it was like a conscious decision, but it was also like the continuation of what I was trying to go for in the
Right.
first record.
Well, it is one of the most strong material that you've recorded, I think.
Thank you.
I've been pushing it onto everybody already in my friend circle. But I'm
Thank you.
curious how the collaboration with Nightmare Effigy came by
Yeah.
because I think he's from Cascadia,
Yeah.
Portland, Oregon. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's I guess a little bit of a funny story. Well, basically the guy that did the border art for my debut record, Ancient Hymns of Apocalypse, they know each other and they also like kind of work together. And through social media, we kind of got to talking. And I already had in mind that I really wanted to do a split release after my record because to me it was like, well, first of all, it's just very cool to do something with another artist and to like release something together. And
Yeah.
also because I was thinking like I'm gonna do an EP anyway. Why not just couple it with another release and make it a full record? And also just there's more reach, and it's a very cool thing. And we started talking and kind of became buddies in like over the months, and we have very similar interests and certain political beliefs and so on that we very much align on. And he's a great guy, and we started talking, and I like kind of brought it up like, "Yo, yeah, are you maybe down to do a split release or whatever?" And he was down to do it, and we started working on it. Yeah, we've been talking a lot, and yeah, it's good vibes. He's a great guy. He makes very sick music. He like fits a little bit more into I know the I guess orthodox traditional like part of the black metal scene, and he tries to really sort of put himself into a broader tradition. Whereas I'm, if I were to say so myself, I try to be well, I kind of do what I feel is right, and I don't really try to like fit in anywhere.
Yeah, you carve
That's
your own path, so to speak, and
yeah,
he's
exactly, and
looking
that's
towards the tradition to. It's cool that
yeah.
you do approach it from a different angle, but then it sounds really well together. So that is really cool because it, of course, very noticeable when the split goes from your side
Yes.
to their side, but it meshes well together. So
Yeah.
you already talked about the political beliefs,
Yeah.
and of course, naming your first song "Empire of Genocide" kind of steers us already towards my next questions.
Yeah.
Would you care to tell us a little bit about those political beliefs? Because if I look
Yeah,
at
sure.
also your bio on Spotify, you make it clear that you're an anti-capitalist and anti-fascist musician, even though in your earlier work that wasn't really like part of the music or the lyrics so much
Yeah.
as it is now. I think in the new work, even though
For
I
sure.
haven't seen the lyrics of that because they're not available online at the moment. But I mean, like
They're
I
on my
said,
Bandcamp, actually. They're on my
oh,
Bandcamp. You can check them out.
okay,
Yeah.
I will
Yeah.
definitely check it out later and
Yeah.
give some
Go
input
ahead.
on that.
Yeah. So, I guess I think an important thing to say here is that my music and Marrow of Man specifically is somewhat of an extension of what I'm going through, what I occupy myself with, and so on. So, being as politically active as I am now and interested in politics and reading about political theory and so on has been a somewhat recent development for me. Pretty much with the entire geopolitical situation and so on, very much intensifying over the last 2 years, pretty much. That has been sort of my gateway into the subject, and sort of being busy with politics and being active in politics somewhat. And my music reflects that. And the thing is that I have started to formulate an opinion, a certain position and ideology, and also being a part of like a community of people, of an organization, and so on. And also, if you just look within the black metal scene, don't have to look very hard until you see some very reactionary elements to the music. And like part of that is of course like the edginess and then the shock value and whatever. But also, I don't want to be associated with people that have certain very reactionary beliefs. And I because I am firm in the beliefs that I have. And I think it's very important to speak out about certain developments that are happening within the scene, but also in a broader context. So it was just a natural step for me to kind of make a stand against what I find to be reactionary and repulsive, and also to sort of develop the more quote unquote positive side. So, like my explanation to certain developments, my position on certain elements. And it's fine to just be like anti fascist or whatever, but I also want to develop like what I actually stand for and not just being anti. And that's gonna show itself over the course of my records in due time. Because what I have planned for my next record will be very much political in nature. I will show some of my more, I guess, ideological positions and some history and so on in the next record. Probably it's nothing set in stone yet, but that's what I'm looking forward to. So yeah, with all of that, with me being more busy with the topics, it just kind of naturally followed that I wanted to write about it, like make a public claim for it as well.
Yeah.
So that's how that happened, kind of.
Looking at political content, right? I think the Israel-Palestine conflict plays a huge part in decimation of the spirit split for you from your side.
Yeah,
I've not heard about whether or not Nightmare Effigy's half of the record is also about it, but yours clearly is.
Yeah, his part isn't. It is like more in line with his other work, and it's like very individualized and very like strong, like on societal decay and like more of a personal experience of misery and so on. But he fully stands behind the message. Also, if you look at my Bandcamp, you have this little blurb of text that kind of says what it stands behind. It's the work, that the album, at least my side, but also his side.
Let me just read it out. I think it's
Yeah,
good
sure,
for
go
the
ahead.
listeners to know about this. And I quote, "This work of art is dedicated to all those martyred in the revolutionary struggle against the reactionary forces of neocolonialism, to all those brave souls that gave their lives for a liberated Palestine. May their voices echo in the halls of eternity and serve as beacons of light for all those still choked and crushed beneath the boot of world imperialism. Long live the Intifada, long live the revolution towards a righteous world."
Yeah, you can get more clear than that, I think.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious what your ideas are. And if we look at the state of the world right now, in the Middle East in particular, it is baffling to see how politicians are turning a blind eye to clear and obvious genocide.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it just ties together with some of the things I mentioned in the text. It's like the question always arises, like, oh, why do we never like do something about genocide. Why are we always too late? And it's because it serves the material interests of people that, own stuff pretty much, right? It serves their interests, their geopolitical goals play. People don't just slaughter a mass of people because they feel like it. There's, of course, a very much underlying form of hatred, but I think that follows from those material conditions. You have to dehumanize the people in order to kind of kill them in order to pursue your material goals. And that's just what we see happening. And it's also the reason that politicians look away, because they get lobbied, they get a shit ton of money. It serves their broader interests and so on. So it's a very painful realization, but it also puts it into perspective. It kind of makes sense why things are happening, why as they are happening. It's because there's all of these reasons for them happening. It's not just irrational people that want to kill people. I mean, that's a very big part, obviously, but we have to look at what the material conditions are for this that is happening.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And it's
it's hard.
something we see now happening on a global scale, right? With Trump and his ilk basically talking shit about Canada at every chance they have, about Canadians at every chance they have, about
Yeah,
people in the Southern Americas, but even going so far as to now basically putting Europeans as secondary world citizens, which is, I think, a blueprint of what has been done to the Palestinian people for
yeah,
decades.
yeah, for
Make
sure.
fun of them, then tell them they're worthless, and then tell them how you are going to make the world better for them as well.
Yeah, sure. Like, actually insane, and it's disgusting to read and see how these people are dehumanized, and like most people are finally seeing through the lies and deceit, and coupled that with the fact that it's like pretty much a live stream genocide. You can't like deny it at this point. I mean, still plenty of people do somehow. But yeah, there are very, very interesting and fascinating developments that are going on in the world right now. Lots of tensions, shifting world powers. We are in a very, very interesting period of time. I always think about this like Lenin quote. That's like there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. And I think we're very much in the second half of that saying right now, because every week something massive is happening, whether it be in Syria, whether it be in Yemen right now with the Houthis, whether it be in America, Latin America, and Europe. We are planning to rearm. There's like so much money going into defense, while all of the social security is being like hollowed out. There's like so much going on right now, and that's also why I think it's important for me personally to make a stand and,
Yeah.
and to show people where I stand on this issue and why it's important that they care as well.
Media is also not helping, of course.
No, I mean the media, they are facilitators of the genocide. Even the framing and the word choice that they use, it's
Yeah.
also apparent. If you look at
Well,
for us, the NOS or something, the way
yeah,
they
yeah,
frame
the
stuff.
Dutch state media. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, I keep coming back to this micro incident on the global scale of when the Israeli football team played in Amsterdam.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
how that was basically put forward as people going Jew hunting in
yeah.
Amsterdam, while
Absolutely insane.
the absolute opposite was
Yeah,
transpiring. Yeah,
yeah. If you just look at all of the footage from that night, if you look at the role of the police, and that's obviously also very much in character with the police, how they defended them, how they enabled them, how they just came in, were chanting death to Arabs and so on. Like, Amsterdam is a very multicultural city, and there are a lot of Arab people. If you go
and there are a
to
lot of
different
Jews as
countries,
well who
yeah,
don't want anything to do with this.
no, exactly. But if you go like in as a very small group, and you already know your country is like very much looked down upon by the city, and you go somewhere and you just chant racist shit, you're bound to get a fist in your face, and
Yeah,
deservingly so. But yeah, how that was framed in the media and so on, and yeah, it
yeah, it was
also that's
repulsive.
it was very repulsive, and it's tied
Yeah.
into like upscaled police repression. And you had like the mayor of Amsterdam, where you had this incident of a Muslim woman that was hit over her head, and she actually like lost her hearing on one side of
Hearing,
her head.
yeah, I heard about
Yeah,
that.
and
Yeah.
she very confidently stated like there has been no use of like disproportionate police violence in this case. It's like,
Yeah.
well, if you look at the fucking footage, you will see that it actually was the case.
Yep.
But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It was very selectively edited, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, and she wasn't even part of the protest. She was like she lost her kid because of like the mass of people, and she was looking for a kid, and she got hit over the head. She wasn't
Yep.
doing anything.
Yep.
Horrible.
Yep. Yeah, that was a terrible situation. I mean, this is something that we actually touched on in a couple of episodes on this podcast. is that there's a conservatism that is inherent to black metal, which kind of like a struggle to navigate from time to time.
Yeah. Sure.
In the fact that I'm being conservative in general is not a bad thing, but being a Nazi is the worst. And what I've come to find is that because black metal basically was an anti-reaction or a reaction to death metal breaking out, and the guys looking to go back to a time when metal was still metal, wearing spikes and leather, and basically trying to get into the mindset of what happened like a decade, maybe half a decade before they started making music. There was a certain conservatism that ran through that early scene. But nowadays, I would say that black metal might even be the new punk
Yeah.
in the other end of the spectrum, where we
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
these clearly lefty lyrics and
Yeah. For
ideas.
sure.
The same goes for a band like
Mhm.
Ashenspire, really doing their own thing, also in left wing of the scene.
Oh
Good
yeah.
for Lot, another good
Yeah.
example. All round stand up guy making really interesting music. We have Ofsky
Yeah.
handing out rainbow stickers with his logo on it. Something that was unthinkable
Yeah. For sure.
maybe 20
Yeah.
years ago. In my opinion, we came to the point where things were so conservative and so navel gazy that it actually became a breeding ground for experimentation and
Yeah.
kind of black metal reinventing itself as a more broad scene with hell we have liturgy and agriculture with trans women as
Yeah.
front women, so to speak, which was of course like unthinkable 10 years ago. We have Gal coming out of the closet
Yeah.
some years ago. I feel that black metal has basically gone from being like the least inclusive type of music to the most inclusive type of music, which I think is also what maybe led me to finally be able to really like drop my guard and become a fan of the music and the scenes.
No, it's very cool to see those developments happen, and I think it's also because of a multitude of factors. Well, first of all, I think that there are just a lot of people in it for the music because the music is just very interesting and cool and unique and experimental and just very diverse, right? I think there aren't that many genres within metal or like more broadly within music that have such a diverse landscape and soundscape in terms of black metal and just attracts a lot of people. And that combined with a sort of like the way it's kind of structured with how underground it is and how like within you have like these little circles everywhere, especially also in online spaces. And if you have people that like love the music and you kind of seek out other people which also make the music and love the music but have different political opinions and it's generally accepted, those start to become sort of like these groups, and those start to grow because it attracts other people. They're like, I really like black metal, but I don't really like the Nazism stuff. So that you get attracted to that. And when I look at sort of black metal and its development, the history and so on, from what I understand at least, and people make the comparison between like Satanism and Nazism. That's like, oh, it's both in terms of shock factor. But I actually read this theory that kind of dismantles that. And the thing is, Satanism is an anti-establishment ideology, right? It turns against the power and the misuse of power of the church. You delved into this in your podcast, so you of course know this. And I think that Nazism is the opposite because when you
Yeah,
look at what
fascism is exactly
fascism,
the opposite of that. Yeah.
exactly, as Mussolini himself said, it should be called corporatism because it's the merger of state and corporate power. It's like it's the complete opposite of Satanism. So that excuse of like, oh, it's just shock factors, just being edgy, it doesn't hold any strength, any merit to it.
No, I
And
think
it's just
Bathory
yeah,
already explained that like in the late 80s, where he said,
yeah.
these guys are holding ideas in their head that are mutually exclusive.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So it's good to see that it's becoming more and more sort of normalized to be outspoken against this stream, and the elitists can think whatever they want, and they can be apolitical, which doesn't exist, of course. However they want, they've been like, oh, it's just about the music. Well, I mean, these guys have a Nazi flag, so clearly it isn't just about the music. You can be
Yeah.
apolitical when faced with that kind of stuff. And the
Yeah.
thing is, scenes are ever developing and changing, and the people that are within them, and so on. So it's just very cool to see that it's indeed going into this direction. And
I
yeah,
almost have less respect for those who then say, well, I'm not a political guy and I'll work with anyone. I think it's such a cowardly
yeah,
stance to take.
yeah,
Uh,
I agree.
Yeah.
I saw a quote from Martin Luther King actually, and it was about like the KKK, and he said like the bigger enemy is not the Klansman, but the moderate white person, quote unquote, because they enable such behavior and they look away and they're more concerned with having like order and peace instead of like actual justice and liberation and so on. So that's that's I agree with the sentiment there. Like being apolitical is definitely not something that's even possible, I think, because if you take the stance of no stance, you're taking the stance of the status quo per definition. So yeah, no, it's good to see the developments that are happening in the scene for sure. And it's still a lot of work that needs to be done,
Oh my
and
God.
I'm going to do my best. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. All right. Well, and I'm also wondering, I mean, you already touched upon this a couple of times that you're working on a new album. What are your expectations when we would be able to catch our first music from that?
All right. So I do have to say I have a lot of ideas and I do have a vision of sort of the sound and the lyrical subjects and so on, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. I basically have a half of a song currently, so not much. And I'm also just very busy with finishing up my studies and work and so on. But I'm aiming for the release to be in about between like half a year and a year. I hope to have the entire record done and to be released somewhere around there. So if everything goes according to plan and I manage to put my head down and grind on this a little bit, I expect the first single or two to be out somewhere in that time region. So it's still a little bit away, but my latest release was only 1 month
Yeah,
ago.
we still
So
have ample of music to listen to in the
yeah,
meantime. So,
exactly.
well, from my side, I pretty much went through everything that I prepared and written down that I wanted to talk to you about. Is
Right.
there something you would like to share before we close this off?
I have the feeling that I haven't like thanked everyone that has gotten me here enough yet. So as you said, it's the people on social media that promote my stuff, the people that buy my stuff, the people that talk with me, that want to sell or press stuff. There's so many names I could name here. If I didn't mention you, please, I'm sorry, but I really appreciate everyone that has been a part of the entire journey. Thank you so much as well for inviting me. I had a lovely time, lovely conversation.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Yeah, it really was. It was a great experience. And if ever something comes up and you want to hang out and talk again, I'm definitely down to be
I would
an
love to
actual
do that.
collaborator.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Let's
yeah,
stay in touch.
sure.
And
Let's do that for
well,
sure. Yes, thank you.
thank you, man.
Yeah. All right.
So here are the liner notes. This podcast was written and recorded by me, Danny van Eyck. Audio engineering and production by Mick Schouten. Technical assistance, encouraging words, editing, a metric ton of cigarette smoke, and a lot of complaining about a twisted ankle came from Björn Bolderdijk. We are on Instagram as Blackfold Podcast, all one word. So give us a follow and share your feedback in the comments if you want to.